Right now, I have Mr. Brad Boyson, Executive Director of SHRM for MIA, here in the studio with me. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shane. My pleasure to be here.
I was talking with a few professionals, and we're saying, what is some of the toughest questions that you have to deal with in your career? And they were saying, by far, when you're in a meeting with a potential employer and they turn around and say, well, hey, and it's early on in the process, and for a fact that, it's very risky that, there's not a lot of chance that you'll get the job. For example, that there's probably 20 or 30 other candidates they're looking at. Right. And the first meeting, they're like, hey, what are you making now? How much are you making now? What's your salary? Right away out of the gates. And how do you deal with that?
Well, I guess my first comment is to say that question's coming at some point. So you're going to have to be prepared to answer it. The question is when it actually is presented to you, where are you in the stage of the process? And backing up, I would hope that most candidates, if there's one piece of advice I'd give them at the beginning of the process, is know your market worth. That's the key. Because based on when that question occurs, you have to make that decision. Am I going to present some of that information? How am I going to deal with that information at that point in time? But knowing your market worth is without a doubt the most important thing you can do.
That's absolutely a fantastic point. And just to qualify for our listeners, SHRM is the world's largest HR association. And so Brad has had a litany of HR positions. Maybe you can just give us a brief touch on a 30-second synopsis of some of the roles you've held.
Sure. As you mentioned at the beginning of the show, I've literally worked all over the world, and in fact in many different industrial sectors. Retail, manufacturing, hospitality. I worked in a .com until that went bankrupt. Most recently, my most recent position was as the head of HR for one of the units for MR here in Dubai. So I've been here for 5 years. But since 2006, I've been really actively involved with SHRM, or some people say outside the U.S., SHRM, which, as you mentioned, is the world's largest HR association. And I got involved with SHRM simply because I felt if I wanted to have an impact in the human resource profession, that I should align myself with the body, with the organization that potentially would have the most influence in the marketplace. So 7 years later, opportunity came up to set up only our third office outside of the United States. The other two countries are China and India. So now we have an office in the UAE. So that's pretty good company for the UAE.
Well, and that actually goes back to my last point, was talking with Dr. Grandy, is that leadership's about value. And the fact that you are one of the leaders for the HR profession in the Middle East is not because you aspire to, it's because you value the contribution that HR, human resources, makes to the organization, to the corporation, and to the community so highly that you want to participate and raise the professional bar, make a contribution to the profession here in the region. And so that's one of the concepts or key concepts for anyone listening to think about how you are thinking about your career and how you can develop yourself. And it kind of loosely ties into your point about that, because we're talking about, have to talk about salary negotiation, is knowing your worth. And so many people don't want to do the work, and they call me 2 days before a written offer is coming to them, and they're like, Shane, they what should I do? I'm in this thing, and it starts from way back. One of the things that I tell people to do is, if you're in an organization and that organization's hiring, volunteer to help with the hiring.
Absolutely.
And say to your boss and to the HR and say, hey, I know a lot of people in this market. Why don't I help you? You start interviewing those people and you get access to the salary bands, and now you get the chance to ask other people that question. Hey, what are you making?
Well, and we've seen this in the market before, and I'm sure you'll agree, is I see a lot of people with HR interests. They move into roles like recruiting, and maybe it's executive recruiting, maybe it's external recruiter, but part of what they're doing in terms of their career development is also assessing the market for themselves. They do that. They will look at different opportunities that perhaps may come their way, and it's a great way to get a better understanding of the market. And I'm a firm believer of approaching HR from sort of that economics point of view, supply and demand, and really understanding the market in terms of supply. And in that sense, it's your competence, it's what you bring to the table. I think one of the challenges a lot of people have in this market is that in the past few years, if you go back 2006, 2007, it was a boom time. And a lot of expectations were built at that time, and a lot of people have had to reevaluate their market expectations. I went through this once before, actually, over 10 years ago. I was working in the .com sector in North America, and I remember the boom-bust cycle. and how it really affects people. So the sooner you can adjust your understanding of your own market worth, the better you're in a position to start to negotiate.
Right, and you should know, what the average salary for that position at that experience level is. If it's X, then you also know that certain brands want to pay below market because they have invested in other things. They have good training and development. They have good international exposure. So they're going to say, well, we can pay X minus 20% and still attract the talent we want. Other organizations are going to say, well, maybe we don't have all those bells and whistles, so we're going to pay X plus 30%. And other organizations have a different management philosophy altogether, and they say, we want the best people, and we're going to pay the most because we believe that talent's expensive. And so once you really know your market, you not only will know what you're worth, but you also start to understand the comp and ben philosophy of the different brands. I don't know, as an HR professional, if that echoes what you see, because as an executive search professional, that's one of my interpretations. What do you see?
I couldn't agree with you more. I was doing a class this week, and we get into the module on compensation and benefits. And one of the things I tell the people is when you're going through the process, if you can only ask 2 questions to an organization to get the most information from the interviewer, one of those questions should be, where do you benchmark your compensation strategy? Because that's the other side of the equation. You may know your own market worth, but you don't know where the organization is positioning itself within the marketplace. I would hope that people would do their best to try and get that information before the interview, but certainly in terms of my advice to candidates is include that in your portfolio of questions. Where does your organization benchmark itself in terms of its compensation strategy? It tells you so much about the organization.
And so when you're dealing with this, and it can get a bit hostile, so the individual says, okay, what are you making now? And one of my mentors said, Shane, it's like a sports game. It's like a football game. You can't score points when you're on defense. So just picture every time it's like a tennis match. Every time I ask you a question, I'm shooting the ball over to your side of the court. And it's my job to shoot the ball back, or you're going to score a point and you're just going to hammer a serve at me. And a serve is much harder to return than a volley. So I just want to keep it in a volley, and I want to start scoring points. So if the person says to me, Shane, well, how much are you making now? I would say, oh, I'm very happy to discuss finances, but at the point when we're about to make an offer, are you saying you're ready to make an offer to me? And then if they say yes or they say no, that's because you're quantifying. It's only fair to talk about your salary if the individual's really going to make you an offer. The second thing is if they don't, some people are too aggressive. Some people will just say, no, I don't care, Shane. I need to know what you're making if you want to move forward in this process. Then I would say, yeah, I understand that the band for this for this role is between X to X plus 30%. As an esteemed organization, I'm sure you'd be at the upper ends of that band. Is that true? Where is your comp band? I would probably steal your line. Like, where do you sit in terms of your compensation and band? Or you could even finesse it and say, I understand that every organization has different strategy, and your compensation and band incentive has to tie into that overarching vision. What is your strategy? For example, we know that X brand pays above market. We all know this brand pays below market. Where do you sit? What's the salary band for this role? And I don't know, as an HR professional, how would that sit with you? If someone's asking you that, is that fair play?
It's absolutely fair. And part of the reason I coach HR professionals about this topic, even if they're not experts in comp and ben, is that it's a way of communicating to individuals on the other side that you're a comprehensive HR professional, that you are involved in all aspects of the organization. And there's good and bad recruiters out there, and sometimes in smaller organizations, the head of HR is doing all of recruiting. Big organizations have dedicated HR or dedicated recruiters. At the end of the day, you really have to make that decision based on when that card is played. But make no mistake, I agree with you completely that there is an advantage to delaying that discussion from the candidate's point of view. And the main reason for that is you as the candidate, you want to be the last person standing. then you've leveled the playing field. That should be one of your primary objectives, especially at the senior level. Do whatever you can to become the last person standing, because then from a point of view of negotiating, you've leveled the playing field. Sometimes, and I've been on the other side of the table, you've actually increased your leverage to the point of having the organization in a difficult situation.
Sure, this is a complex topic, and unfortunately, I don't think we can cover it in this time frame. But we have a career clinic in the DIFC on Tuesday nights from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. in Cafe Nero. So Tuesday, February 5th at the DIFC from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. You can come and I'll explain this in further detail how to do it. But Brad, I know you're a busy guy. I really wanted to thank you for taking the time to come out and talk to us, and really, really insightful stuff tonight.
Well, thank you, Shane. And, I want to give you a compliment, too, because your show's been on for a while now. And as an HR professional in this region, I think you're really adding a lot of value. And I would say to any listener right now is pay attention to the content of your show, because it is good information.
Well, thank you very much. That's thanks again, Brad. That's very nice of you. That's Brad Boyson, Executive Director of SHRM MIA.